thank you. Hopefully everyone can hear me. I've not done a digital conference before, so hopefully if I share my screen, this will all go well.
Yeah, I can see it.
Yeah, I don't know if you can see me too.
Yeah, I can see you.
Okay, right, okay, fab. So yeah, thank you so much for having me today. As Melody mentioned, my name's Lyndsay Townsend and I'm in my first year of PhD study at the University of St Andrews. I've been focusing on folk horror cinema for a few years now, and whilst my previous two dissertations have focused on firstly the Unholy Trinity and then contemporary folk horror cinema, my thesis is currently looking at a more general study about folk horror and its sensory affect. Just going to start my timer. There we go. So when I say the sensory affect of folk horror, I'm speaking of the ways in which folk horror produces a feeling, a type of phenomenological disposition that makes us feel unsettled, like something isn't quite right with the world on screen. So rather than trying to define folk horror logically using a device like Adam Scovell's folk horror chain, I'm exploring the genre in a more emotional and sensory way, using and looking at techniques such as mood, tone and texture, and the way in which they can help us to understand how folk horror produces its ambience and aesthetic, like Andy Pasiorek so succinctly says. And one of the main techniques that I feel folk horror employs really well is the emotional alignment of us as viewers to the characters on screen. So empathy, alignment and spectatorship, it's not a new study in film, and the field of phenomenology really explores how our bodies as an audience are linked to the bodies on screen. So it's Vivian Sobchak who notes, we do not experience any movie only through our eyes. We see and comprehend and feel films with our entire bodily being, informed by the full history and carnal knowledge of our acculturated sensorium. So when we watch a film, we don't just see sound and image, but we're using our own bodies to make meaning of the bodies on screen. And one film in particular that I feel really exemplifies that notion is Ari Aster's Midsummer, which I think is now firmly rooted in the contemporary folk horror canon. So if you haven't seen the film, it follows a young woman called Dani, who after months of grieving a traumatic family loss, follows her boyfriend and his friends to a Swedish commune called the Haga, where the happy and idyllic community are not as they seem in traditional folk horror fashion. And it's Midsummer in particular that really provides an exhausting, grueling experience for the audience watching at home, mainly through the representation of the human body. So I'm going to be examining two types of body in Midsummer. So firstly, the body as a site of confusion and disorientation, using the process of somatic empathy. And then secondly, the body as a site of grotesque violence and pain, using the technique of sensation mimicry. And in both examples that I'll show, we're encouraged to empathise with the body on screen, creating feelings of uneasiness and uncertainty, and also adhering to common folk horror narrative tropes. So, to explore the body as a site of confusion and disorientation, I want to turn to the process of somatic empathy, which is a particular carnal response that makes us feel ourselves feeling, enabling a strong awareness of oneself as an embodied viewer. So this is achieved through cinematic techniques which reduce the sensual and phenomenological distance between character and viewer through techniques such as amplifying sounds and close-ups. So these techniques are bringing us closer to the body on screen. This fits perfectly with a scene from Midsummer where Dani has recently arrived at the Haga and has been encouraged to digest a mysterious mushroom tea. So I'm going to attempt to play a clip, fingers crossed, and then discuss its effects afterwards. Just thought, I think with sharing my screen, I can't remember if I have included the sound. So I'm going to stop sharing the screen and share it again, hopefully with sound on it this time. So bear with me. Okay. So please let me know if you can hear it.
Josh, can you?
I heard that.
Okay, hopefully you can hear me again and the sound was okay. So in the scene that we just watched, the use of amplifying sounds and close-ups are used really effectively to align us with Danny's body. So through the heightened sound of her deeply exhaling in and out, and the close-ups of her face and her eyes slowly opening and closing as she falls deeper into a drug-induced trance, we're encouraged to take on this relaxed state and coordinate our own bodies with Danny's movements. So we can understand how the cool wind would feel on her face and the texture of the grass underneath her fingertips. So through image and sound, we are aligned with her body. And this relationship between our bodies and Danny's body on screen means that when her trip suddenly takes an unnerving turn and her breathing quickens and she starts to panic, our alignment with her body is strengthened. So when Danny is disoriented, subsequently, so are we. When Danny arrives in the hut then and sees her own distorted face with bulging eyes and drooping cheeks, this becomes a point of extreme discomfort and alienation. Immediately we know that this is not a normal occurrence for a human body to experience, and therefore understand the terror that Danny feels upon fleeing the hut and running into the woods. Through this scene, therefore, we're slowly aligned through amplified sound and image. We're connected to the body on screen, and then quickly disoriented and alienated, just like our folk horror protagonist. So the second type of body that I want to explore in Midsommar is a body of grotesque violence and pain using the process of sensation mimicry. So as Xavier Aldana Reins notes, sensation mimicry is a type of mimicry which rests on lived body experiences and or the capacity to extrapolate our carnal knowledge onto situations that have not been personally experienced. To explain this, Reis uses the torture porn genre as a general example, saying that, for example, despite not having our own limbs cut off by a hacksaw, we can still experience and understand the pain in, for example, Saw. So we don't have to have physically gone through these actions to understand the pain and the violence on screen. And this is exemplified really well in Midsommar when Danny and her group witness an outdated tradition that the Haga practices. So our protagonists are gathered at the base of a large cliff, and it's later revealed that an Atastupa is taking place, a sacrifice of commune members when they reach the age of 72. After slicing their palms and smearing blood over a sacrificial rock, an elderly woman continues to throw herself from the precipice onto a rock below, followed by a man doing the same. So whilst the death of the first woman is shocking to watch and is made increasingly worse by Danny's extreme bodily reaction, the death of the man, also named Dan, is even more punishing. I'll now show the clip, but I just want to say that it is very violent, and if you're uncomfortable with gore and blood, I would maybe advise looking away. So if you've seen the film before, you'll agree that we don't need to see what happens next. So two elements of this scene are especially grueling. So firstly, the fact that Dan plummets feet first from the cliff, and secondly, that he survives the fall. So as human beings, we are aware of the level of impact that our own bodies can withstand. And through a few seconds, we're instantly aware of the pain that Dan is experiencing through surviving his fall. Aware of the sensitivity of nerves, the fragility of skin, and the pressure that bones can withstand, viewers can immediately empathise with the violence on screen and somatically react to the fact that Dan's legs have taken the pressure of his fall. And we might show this either through a shudder, a flinch, or even a verbal outburst. Similarly, we've all experienced the pain of breaking skin at some point, even if it's only from cutting your finger on a sharp object or a sharp surface. So the fact that Dan can actively feel the severity of his injury is beyond comprehension, and consequently makes us react in an extremely physical and sensorial way. So here, our own bodies react through a mutual understanding of how bodies should be and the correct working order. So when seeing Dan's leg snapped at the bone and mangled from hitting such a concrete surface at high speed, we truly understand the grotesque and violent nature of the community that Dani has found herself entangled with. I'll just summarise, hold on. There we are. So in summary, Midsommar presents two types of bodies, the unsettled and the grotesque, and through using phenomenological techniques such as somatic empathy and sensation mimicry, we can really examine how the film reduces the distance between our own bodies and the bodies on screen. By being aligned with Dani's body and then mutually experiencing her bad trip, to feeling the pain of Dan's sacrifice and mangled limbs, Midsommar effectively sparks a folk horror feeling where we experience discomfort, uneasiness, and uncertainty. Furthermore, while still adhering to a familiar tropes of a folk horror narrative, including the alienation of our protagonist and the brutal traditions of a community with outdated beliefs, Midsommar effectively highlights the ways in which a phenomenological analysis is increasingly useful in unpicking the intricacies of folk horror as a genre and understanding its sensory effect on its own audience. So yeah, thank you so much for listening, and I look forward to any questions. Thank you.